And following Trump's guilty verdict, we're also going to be joined by a pollster and strategist who's worked with Trump's Republican Party, Frank Luntz. He's with us now down the line. It is, to say the very least, I'm going to go with you first, Frank Luntz, a historic day. I mean, the question that everybody's asking, does this help Trump or does it hurt him?
Well, it does both at the same time. We did 2 focus groups. I ended my research at 3:30 a.m. British time, because you're 5 hours ahead. What we found out in both sessions is, number one, it's going to increase the polarization, which we thought could not get worse. Number two, it means that the undecided vote is now going to decide because they're reacting to the verdict. Most people believe that it was a correct verdict, and yet nobody wants to see Donald Trump go to jail. Third, and this is the political impact, I believe that Joe Biden will take a narrow lead over the next 48 hours, as some people who are supporting Trump do not want to support someone who was found guilty of a felony, in fact, multiple felonies. That said, Donald Trump had his best fundraising day ever after the decision. We're still within the 24 hours. No one has raised more money online in a shorter period of time as Trump, as people are donating to him in response to his being found guilty. Make no mistake, Americans like the underdog. Americans do respond to the people who they think have been victimized, and that's what they think has happened here. That said, Joe Biden is going to benefit from this, at least in the short term, as undecided voters make the decision right now, 5 months before Election Day, that they don't want to support someone who has been found guilty in the court of law.
So, Frank Luntz, it's interesting, isn't it? Because if we roll back to 2016 and that campaign before he was elected, we heard during this trial, actually, from Hope Hicks, one of his former communication leaders in the campaign, you know, that moment when we heard that sort of locker room banter about how he might treat a woman and how famous men can get away with grabbing women, and, you know, there was plenty of choice language in that. At that point, it was thought, well, this is it. Even in the Trump camp, they thought, well, this is a watershed moment. This is going to change the course of the election. And, of course, we know what happened. He got elected in. And then he got this moniker of being Teflon Don, right? For you, is this a different moment?
It's a somewhat different moment for this reason. The phrase that they used to sing, used to scream, used to shout in unison, lock her up, that phrase can now be used against him at the Democratic convention and at the Democratic functions. We are a horrifically divided country. We are a horrifically angry, bitter. This is going to the root of democracy. There's only 2 bright lights in all of this. Number one, the public does believe that justice was done, even if they disagree with the fact that this court case came to being in the first place. And number two, it does create a significant chink in Trump's armor. I'm not willing to say that this hands the election to Joe Biden. Having spent so much time with Trump voters, I'm focused on that 4% in only 7 states that have not made up their minds. Yeah. And of that 4%, and that's who we talked to last night in the focus groups for the New York Times and others, even they only slightly moved in the direction of Joe Biden. Yeah. I don't think that this is the deciding factor, and I do believe that the election is too close to call.
Right. Well, Frank Luntz, the American people care about fairness. And one of the things that's curious to us in this country is you have prosecutors who are elected. And in this case, Alvin Bragg, who's the district attorney, gets elected in by saying, I will put Trump in jail. I'm going to prosecute him. Now, they may think that the verdict is fair, but given the number of politically motivated prosecutions still outstanding against Donald Trump, do you think undecided voters are going to be swayed by the fact that this just looks like it's politically motivated use of the legal system? And, you know, the American system are not happy about. The American people are not necessarily happy about that, right?
These are great questions. And that is exactly what Donald Trump is going to claim. And here's the thing that most people don't realize. You know when the sentencing is? July 11th. You know, the beginning of the Republican convention, less than 7 days after that. The timing for Trump is awful, but this is the only one of those cases that will come to trial before the election. The Supreme Court has to make some decisions about presidential immunity, and that's delaying everything to after the election. So in the end, the public looks at this and says, I don't know if I would have brought this case to trial. I think Donald Trump is guilty, but I don't find it to be so significant. And we cannot forget that this is a two-man race, Donald Trump and Joe Biden. So at the same time that Trump is weakened, Joe Biden, who's at 81 years of age, older, the public looks at him and wonders, is he too old to be reelected, even though Trump is almost the same age? Basically, we are increasing the number of people who think that, number one, democracy is not working. Number two, that we're more divided now than at any time in modern times. And number three, that they wish that there was anybody else but these two candidates running.
Jackie Smith and Ed Vasey, we have, and whether it's still in name or not, a special relationship. It's always been couched that way between the UK and America. So what happens over there matters to us here hugely. So, you know, you've got this potential situation, haven't you, November the 6th, say, that you could have the former Director of Public Prosecutions, Sir Keir Starmer, our Prime Minister potentially, meeting a convicted criminal who is potentially could be the President of America. This is quite an extraordinary thought. How do we feel here politically about what is happening there and about this verdict? What does it mean for us?
Well, I think if Donald Trump does win the presidential election, that will have been the will of the American people, and whoever is the Prime Minister in the UK would rightly, for our interests, want to build a constructive relationship with them. And you've already seen David Lammy and others around Labour trying to develop a relationship with the people around Trump in case that happens. But I would also say that this teaches us something, doesn't it, quite important about the way in which politicians behave. When Frank Luntz says that the US has never been more divided, one of the reasons for that is because there are politicians who are willing to undermine the very basis of a democratic system, to refuse to accept the result of an election, to consistently criticise and undermine, including in response to the verdict yesterday, the legal system in the US. If politicians do that, that does create division and uncertainty.
But we had that, the hints of that coming here when Boris Johnson decided to prorogue Parliament in order for himself. And often they say, whatever happens in America eventually comes over here, culturally, in other ways, in the way we think, in the way we behave. Ed? I mean, are we immune to this?
No, we're not immune to this at all. I mean, it is obviously unprecedented that Donald Trump has had this conviction, but at the same time, it is kind of baked into his image and what people think of him and whether or not they're going to vote for him. He's not going to go to prison. He's going to get a substantial fine. And don't forget, he's going to appeal, so the kind of eventual sentence may even come out after the presidential election. And if Rishi Sunak becomes Prime Minister, of course, he would be able to exchange with Donald Trump his own experience of being fined over breaking the COVID rules, admittedly a very, very, very
Which
tiny...
Which he was challenged on in Buckinghamshire.
Exactly, a very, very tiny misdemeanour. The French politicians are always going to jail for campaign finance breaches, which is quite common. I'm not in any way dismissing what Trump has done.
But is that a democracy that we emulate? I mean, one of the problems here, to say the very least, whatever your view on Trump, and he's a polarising figure, you can't even suggest anything good or bad about him without evincing a huge reaction. But it's not just about him. What about politicians who use prosecutions as a political weapon? I mean, isn't that the end, the death of democracy under the rule of law?
Well, obviously we have a different system here.
Sure.
And we don't have that the type of sort of political discussion that you heard from the...
Well, just to be clear, you couldn't have that because it would be an unfair trial. The trial would be stopped. I mean, imagine the circumstances. You bring up lockdowns, for example, and offences that took place, regulatory and otherwise, during COVID. Imagine the circumstances where Sir Keir Starmer said, vote for me, right, and I will send Boris Johnson to prison.
No, I mean, we do have a very different political culture in the UK compared to American. European political culture is very different from that in America. And you elect the dog catcher, you elect the prosecutor. The Supreme Court is a major part of the political discourse in America, and we know that Supreme Court judges are coming under unbelievable scrutiny at the moment, quite rightly, for playing fast and loose with ethics rules, for example. So it is a very different culture. I think what is, the most worrying thing for me about Trump is Trump. It's the people who've got behind him and normalised and apologised for his behaviour. And this is, as it were, what he's been prosecuted for is, at the moment, the least serious charge against him. I mean, the other ones about fomenting insurrection, which will come probably after the presidential election, are much more serious. And as you indicated earlier, refusing to accept the basis of an election result. But the entire Republican Party has been captured by this man and now normalise and apologise for this behaviour. Yeah,
let's go back to Frank Luntz, who's here, just to bring you up to sort of speed. Not you, Frank, obviously. I mean, everyone at home. Because you've been up... you've only had 2 hours sleep, I believe, and thank you so much for being on the show this morning. Just to let our viewers know, because, of course, we don't cover and we might not be interested in every small twist and turn that happened in the lead-up to this morning's breaking news of the conviction. But there is a moment here which goes to the heart of what Rob was saying there about the unholy closeness between political appointments and independent jurisprudence in America. And we've got a clip here that hopefully just brings to light and illuminates this point for our viewers this morning, which is Megyn Kelly, the very famous journalist. She worked for Fox News. She was the one who Trump said, when she was moderating a political debate with him in it, she was bleeding from her eyes, bleeding from wherever, he said, and it became an enormous issue over there about misogyny in public life. Let's just listen to Megyn Kelly, who is describing exactly what goes to the heart of what the appeal might be based on. And that is the point, isn't it? Correct. The point you were making there. That potentially is the idea we'd have here. It's Keir Starmer saying that about Boris Johnson.
Except he wouldn't.
No, he wouldn't.
We have a very different political
No, absolutely he wouldn't, but in a sense of making...
And the 12 jurors, presumably, didn't run for any sort of office on the basis of saying that.
No, exactly. It couldn't happen here, but in order to sort of understand what the problem might be in America, I suppose that is the only example we have here of what that might feel like. Frank
but
Luntz,
I don't want... But I think, Ranveer, the suggestion that somehow or another America doesn't have a sophisticated political system, there's all sorts of parts of it that I wouldn't want us to import here, including that. But that is a developed democracy that is being undermined by the things that politicians are doing, actually.
On both sides, you'd agree, right? I mean, it's not just Trump.
I think it's more on one side than the other, to be honest.
Let's get Frank Luntz's view, Rob.
Frank, just to be clear, if that happened in this country, as Jackie Smith, our previous Home Secretary, said, that would be the end of the criminal case. It would be what's called an abusive process straight away. And we should also sort of set up what the offences are. Basically, Donald Trump, I'm not in any way undermining the seriousness of it, but, he paid off a adult film worker, is that what we're calling her, in order, the jury found, to win an election. Now, that happens across the political spectrum. It's happened in other parties. You need to think about various other players, Bill Clinton, Paula Jones and Monica Lewinsky, etc., etc. Here, we are in a moment of such polarisation. Help us understand, if you can, how this is a fair prosecution and the extent to which that's going to impact things.
Well, it's improper. It's unseemly, and it's actually sad that this has happened. And I want to emphasize 2 points. Number one is that special relationship is real. It's the reason why I'm in the UK right now, guiding a group of West Point cadets through London, because I believe that the British democracy and the American democracy are so essential that we be united and moving forward. Second is that you don't want this polarization that happened in America and how quickly you forget what was going on during Brexit. I was here. I watched your country come apart over its relationship with Europe. And if you remember, there were several different governments. It was a disaster. So both countries face this. Yours over a significant policy, ours over the uncharted behavior of a presidential candidate. That said, please don't import, because you're right in the middle of your own election, keep American consultants away from here. Keep American politics away from here. Yeah. Keep our advertising, keep our fundraising, keep our approach. Because in America right now, you can say and do anything if it helps you get elected. You can say and do anything if it's to embarrass the other side. And that's not a functioning democracy. It is the right to speak up. Americans have a constitution and freedom of speech. Don't do it. It will undermine the safety, the security, the vibrancy of democracy. I am embarrassed, but I just remind you, we survived wars, we survived Watergate, we will survive Donald Trump. We will get through this because in the end, the people are smart enough and engaged enough that they will say no, and they will not let us on either side fail.
And Frank, briefly, because we're just going to move on to some other domestic news stories now in the time we've got left, but just briefly, Sarah Palin is coming on later, former vice presidential running mate. She, in the past, has said that she could predict another civil war in America. I mean, we saw that, obviously, what happened at the Capitol on the January the 6th riots. That trial on, on inciting that violence is still to come about. But are you worried, personally, that there could be some sort of repeat of this?
Actually, no. Look, the opposite of love is not hate, which was on January 6th. The opposite of love is indifference. What I'm worried of is that Americans look to democracy and say, you know what? It has failed. I'm going to go pay attention to something else. I'm afraid that we give up. I'm afraid that we give in. I'm afraid that we accept the status quo and don't try to make things better, which is inherently American, that the next generation has it better than this one. That I am afraid of. These divisions, I am afraid of. A civil war, no.
Well, it's been absolutely fantastic, Frank, to have you on the show.
Than's very much.
Yeah, thank you so much. And I hope you get a bit more sleep, but I doubt it. So you won't be sleeping until November, I should imagine, at this rate. Really interesting to hear all of those sort of warnings, in a way.
Well, the Tories are trying to do it in this election. I mean, they called Keir Sleepy Keir to try and import the Trump attack on Biden. And, of course, Keir is younger than Jackie. He's not an old guy geezer, is he, Jackie?
The Tories that are still...
He's actually older than me, but...
the Tories who are still in the Tory party that haven't left or defected or are still standing. It's quite a moment.
Yeah.
Right.
I love this guy, Mark Logan, the MP who's just defected to Labour. He's got an earring.
This came up yesterday.
He's got an earring.
He's not the only MP with an earring.
No, but he's the only male MP with
So
an
we've
earring.
got the latest Tory defector to Labour. This is Mark Logan. Should we play a little bit, if we've got time, of what he said yesterday? I mean, one wonders how many more will turn their backs on their colleagues before the July the 4th.
Well, yeah, but the Tory party is splintering in both directions because, very welcome as far as I'm concerned that Mark Logan is coming, supporting Labour. But, of course, Lucy Allen up in Telford advising her constituents as she retires as a Conservative MP.
Well, we've got
to support reform.
We've got so many talented MPs. It seems only fair that we should help out the other party.
We should help out the other party. Can we just come on to, and I'm particularly interested because obviously Rob's with us today, about the Diane Abbott issue. And Angela Rayner has now... It seems, we keep saying broken ranks, everyone seems to be breaking ranks. I don't know whether there are any ranks left to break. She's now come out and said, I can't see a reason why Diane Abbott can't run for MP.
Smith, do you see any reason why Diane Abbott can't stand as a Labour MP going forward?
Well, we talked about this yesterday, and I said I thought Diane had been treated badly by the Labour Party. The reason that the decision about whether or not she can stand rests with the National Executive Committee, and the final decision about who will be candidates for Labour will be made next Tuesday. I'd be perfectly happy for Diane to stand.
Why has the process taken so long? I mean, it seems like we talk about politically motivated attacks. This is, without question, precisely that. It's about getting rid of that hard left of the party,
Well, there's two separate things, I think, Rob. I think Diane is a special case. But I also think what Keir Starmer is engaged in, and he's been completely open about this, is bringing the Labour Party back into the service of the British people, never again putting us in the position we were in 2019, where, frankly, the British people told us that they didn't trust us and they didn't trust our leadership and they didn't trust the people we were putting in front of the electorate. That's what Keir Starmer is trying to do, and I support him in doing that.
And just to bring people up to speed, because, again, it's about an article that Diane Abbott wrote in April last year in which she was accused of being anti-Semitic. And, of course, you talk so broadly and so passionately about that issue because it affects you, your life.
Well, it affects all of us.
It affects all of us. It affects all of society. What's your view on it?
Well, I mean, the thing about this issue is the extent to which you've got robust disciplinary procedures in place, but also the extent to which when somebody apologises, as she did, and whatever my views about Diane Abbott are immaterial, whether there's room for that apology to be heard, and when somebody says, I've learnt from that, whether we, not just as people who are interested in politics, but society at large, are prepared to enable people to educate themselves and grow. And if we're not prepared to do that, I think all of the education I do, all of the things you do, being politicians in general, all of us are in trouble, it seems to me.
Yeah, fantastic. Right, thank you so much, Ed and Jackie.